Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, leave the algorithm and the headlines at the door and slip with me into a palace that most people only think they know. Forget the movie posters and the cliches of the harem as an endless silk cushion daydream. This is the real story of the Ottoman Imperial harem told as a slow walk through locked doors and lamplit corridors. You'll meet the women, eunuchs, princes and princesses who lived, loved, learned, plotted, prayed, and sometimes ruled from behind latticed windows. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. Imagine Istanbul at night. The last tour groups have long since left Topkapı Palace. The ticket booths are dark, the souvenir stalls packed away, and the Bosphorus is just a soft, restless noise beyond the walls. In your mind, a watchman lifts a heavy key, turns it in a lock, and swings open a door that for centuries was closed to almost everyone. The private world once known as the Ottoman Harem. For tonight you're allowed to step inside, not in the bright, crowded way of daytime, but in a quiet, lantern-lit imagination that lets you move slowly, listening to echoes. Before you walk too far, it helps to know that what you're about to explore did not begin as a legend of luxury and intrigue. It began as something surprisingly ordinary, a family's back rooms. The word harem comes from roots meaning forbidden, protected, sacred. At first, it simply describes the private quarters of a home, the part of the house set aside for women, children, and close male relatives. In many Ottoman households, there are two zones. At the front, the selamluk, where male guests are received, coffee is poured and business is discussed. Further inside lies the harem, where only family and trusted servants may pass. Privacy here is not scandalous. It is a form of honour, a way of saying, oh, these people are under my protection. So before there is an imperial palace, there is a modest wooden house in 14th century Bursa, the Ottomans' first important capital. Step into that space for a moment. The front room is full of men, smoke, and talk. Behind a simple partition, perhaps just a curtain or carved wooden screen, the inner life hums along. You hear the chop of a knife on a wooden board, the murmur of women's voices, the soft fussing of a baby. A girl threads a needle by lamplight, her fingers stained slightly with dye. The air smells of bread, wool, and wood smoke. This small protected corner is a harem too. As the Ottoman family becomes a dynasty, that small domestic pattern grows sideways and upward. The early rulers are not yet emperors, they are frontier lords, war leaders carving out territory in northwestern Anatolia. But even a war leader needs a household, and a household needs an inner space. In Bursa, the first palace takes shape, perhaps not as grand as later buildings, but already a complex where government and family share the same walls. Picture the palace on the hillside, its roofs tiled, its walls a bit higher than the neighbours' houses. Somewhere near the middle is a cluster of rooms where the rulers' wives, concubines, children, older female relatives and their servants live together. Floors creak slightly under bare feet. Kilim carpets soften the sound. A brass basin gleams near a low shelf. An older woman, maybe the ruler's mother, leans against a pile of cushions, shelling nuts into a bowl as she listens to news brought in from the outer rooms. In these early days, we catch only glimpses of individuals. One of the first women we know by name is Nilüfer Hatun, originally of Christian background, who entered the household of Orhan, the second Ottoman ruler, as an enslaved concubine. She converted to Islam, bore him children, and became the mother of Murad I, a future sultan. Her journey, from outsider to key figure in the dynasty's inner circle, foreshadows many later stories. For now, you might picture her as a young woman in a Bursa courtyard, watching a boy play with a wooden toy, not yet knowing he will one day rule, and that her own title will change with his. Life in this palace harem is busy, but it is not yet the carefully layered institution of later centuries. It is still at heart a family home, just one where the stakes are higher, and every child born might alter the future of the realm. As Ottoman power expands, the centre of that family shifts. In the mid-14th century, the dynasty pushes into the Balkans and moves its main seat to Edirne, a city closer to the new frontiers. The palace there grows more ambitious, spreading along the river, surrounded by gardens and baths and service quarters. Somewhere inside that expanding complex, the harem grows too. Follow the sound of women laughing softly, the splash of water being poured into a copper basin. In Edirne, the ruler's household is larger. More concubines, more servants, more children, more visiting female relatives. A young girl might arrive in the harem from a village in the Balkans or the Caucasus, captured or purchased, frightened and unsure. She will be converted to Islam, taught a new language, trained in manners, sewing, music, maybe even reading. If fortune smiles, she might catch the Sultan's attention and one day become the mother of a prince. If it does not, she may spend her life serving others, her story woven quietly into the background of palace routine. This mixture of intimacy and slavery sits uncomfortably with modern ears. Inside the palace, it is framed as household management, as duty and protection, wrapped in rituals and rules. Affection and exploitation can coexist in the same room. A senior consort might genuinely care for the frightened girl she supervises, even as their relationship remains deeply unequal. For a voiceover, you can let that complexity breathe, without rushing to tidy conclusions. This inner world is full of contradictions, and the stones do not explain themselves. Look again at the architecture of Edirne's palace. At the edges, courtyards where officials gather, soldiers stand guard and petitioners wait. Closer in, reception halls, audience chambers, tiled rooms where the Sultan meets dignitaries. Deeper still, past guarded doors and narrow passages, the harem. The further inward you go, the fewer strangers are allowed. Space and power are arranged like an onion, layer after layer, with the harem near the centre. Standing at the threshold, you meet another set of figures, eunuchs. Their presence links the Ottoman palace to older traditions from Byzantium, Persia, and other Near Eastern courts. Eunuchs, castrated men, serve as guards and gatekeepers, especially at the boundaries of the women's quarters. In the 15th century, many are of Balkan or Caucasian origin. They control access, carry messages, escort visitors, and serve as the living locks on the palace's most private doors. You can imagine one standing quietly beside a heavy wooden door, a key at his belt, a lamp in his hand. If a physician is summoned to see a sick child in the harem, this man supervises the journey, waits outside the room, and leads the doctor away again as soon as the visit is over. If a message must be delivered to a powerful woman inside, he carries it, but does not linger. To most people in the empire, the harem is an invisible world. To the eunuchs, it is the corridor they patrol every day, a space they inhabit without fully belonging to it. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans are strong enough to attempt what generations of Muslim armies before them had dreamed of, the conquest of Constantinople. When Mehmed II finally takes the city in 1453, the dynasty gains not only a new capital, but a vast stage on which to reshape its palaces, its ceremonies, and its private life. In the new capital, the first major Ottoman residence is what later sources call the Old Palace, Eski Saray, built near today's Beyazıt Square. Its high walls rise above the rebuilt city like a statement. The dynasty is here to stay. Inside, courtyards, halls, baths and gardens form a self-contained world. At its heart, once again, is the harem. Now something important happens. The royal women, wives, concubines, sisters, daughters, widowed consorts of previous sultans, are increasingly gathered in this one central palace. Rather than being spread between multiple cities, the dynasty's female household is concentrated behind a single ring of walls. That changes everything. Alliances, tensions, and family politics all intensify when so many lives share the same cloistered space. Walk in your imagination into one of Eski Saray's inner courtyards. The paving stones are worn smooth. A cypress tree casts long shadows. A group of young girls practice walking with bowls balanced on their heads, supervised by an older servant who claps sharply if anyone stumbles. In an upstairs room, a princess embroideries a cushion, occasionally glancing at the doorway in case news arrives from her brother, the Sultan. Across a corridor, an aging concubine from a previous reign sits by a window, telling stories to the children who've adopted her as a sort of unofficial aunt. The place feels full but contained, a little city of women and a few trusted men. Eski Saray also functions as a kind of reservoir for the dynasty's marriage strategies. When high-ranking officials or provincial governors are to be rewarded or drawn closer to the throne, brides are often chosen from its residents. A woman who grew up entirely within these walls might leave them only once, carried in a litter to a new household, her marriage binding a distant province to the imperial family. Others, especially concubines whose sons never reached the throne, may spend decades here, their fortunes tied to memories of past reigns. While this is happening, another palace begins to rise on the old Acropolis overlooking the Bosphorus, the complex that will become known as Topkapı. In the 1460s and 1470s, it is still a work in progress, a spread of courtyards, pavilions and service buildings stretching toward the sea. At first, the main women's quarters remain at Eskişehir, while the new palace develops as the seat of administration and ceremony. But the structure anticipates what is coming. Imagine walking through early Topkapı while it is still half new. Stone dust underfoot, the smell of fresh-cut timber, workers taking a break beside a brazier, rubbing cold hands together. The plan unfolds in layers, an outer court for services, a second court for official receptions, a more secluded inner court for the Sultan's private life. Somewhere, plans are on a wooden table for buildings that will one day house the Imperial Harem within these walls, closer to the centre of power than ever before. For now, though, as the 15th century draws to a close, the emotional core of the dynasty is still in those inner rooms of Eskişehir. There, after the call to evening prayer dies away over the city's hills, mothers hush children to sleep. A lullaby in Ottoman Turkish drifts through a half-open door. A lamp is turned down. Outside, Constantinople transforms from Byzantine to Ottoman. Churches become mosques. New buildings rise, trade routes adjust. Inside, someone folds a piece of cloth. Someone whispers a hope for her child's future. Someone else silently accepts that her own hopes have narrowed to the width of this courtyard. If you step back now and look at the journey we've made together, you can see the shape of something new forming. The harem has grown from a simple private room in a family house to the concentrated heart of a royal household in a powerful capital. It has gathered into itself concubines and princesses, servants and tutors, older women with memories of previous sultans, young girls who barely remember life before the palace. It is becoming an institution, a place of education, of marriage arrangement, of dynastic continuity. And yet, for all the expansion, the core idea remains the same. There is always a threshold, always a door that most people never cross, always an inner space where the public eye does not reach. In the next part of the story, that threshold will shift into Topkapı itself, and the harem will become the tiled, intricate, strictly ranked world that later visitors only guessed at. For tonight, in this first chapter, you can let the echoes fade, the clink of copper in Bursa, the river breeze in Edirne, the muffled footsteps in the old palace of Istanbul. As they soften, you are left with the memory of doors within doors, and the knowledge that behind them, an empire's most intimate history is quietly taking shape. When the harem comes to Topkapı, in the middle of the 16th century, a decision quietly changes the geography of Ottoman power. Until then, the main women's quarters of the dynasty are at the old palace, Eskişehir, near what is now Beyazıt Square. Topkapı, up on the Acropolis, is already the administrative and ceremonial heart of the empire, but its inner courtyards do not yet hold the full imperial harem. That changes under Suleiman the Magnificent. After a devastating fire damages the old palace in the 1540s, his powerful consort Hürrem Sultan is said to persuade him to move the dynastic harem into Topkapı itself. Over the next decades, new wings, courtyards and tiled rooms rise along the northern side of the palace, facing the Bosphorus. Brick by brick, the Sultan's family life shifts from one hill of Istanbul to another. By the late 16th century, the move is complete. Royal women, children and their servants no longer live primarily in a separate palace across town. They are now just a few locked doors away from the council chamber and the Sultan's private audience rooms. The imperial harem has arrived at Topkapı, and the palace begins to feel like a single layered organism rather than two halves of a divided body. You feel that change in the way you walk. Instead of imagining a carriage ride between palaces, you turn a corner, pass a gate and suddenly find yourself in a different world, physically attached to the first. You step through an inner door into the courtyard of the eunuchs, the first square of this enclosed city. The space feels practical rather than romantic. long facades with windows, a monumental fireplace at one end, and on the upper stories the small repeated doors of dormitory rooms. By day, this courtyard once hummed with the life of the black eunuchs who guarded and administered the harem. They were led by the chief harem eunuch, the Kızlar, one of the most powerful officials in the empire, ranking just below the highest ministers in protocol. At night, you can imagine the faint glow of oil lamps in those windows, the murmur of voices, the creak of wood as a watchman shifts his weight against the cold. From here, doors lead to classrooms for princes, to the quarters of gentlemen in waiting, and onward to the main gate of the harem. This is the threshold. Behind you lies the palace world of kitchens, stables, and council halls. Ahead of you, behind the next gate, lie the rooms of women and children whose lives will never be lived in public view. The eunuchs, with their keys and ledgers, stand at this narrow border. You might think of them as the palace's combination of security guards, postal service, and very strict event planners. Pass through the main entrance and the light changes. The harem is not a single big hall, but a chain of spaces, courtyards linked by narrow corridors, rooms arranged around small squares, passages turning unexpectedly to climb up or down. One modern visitor compared it to wandering through the world's most beautiful backstage area, and the description fits. Sources disagree on the exact number of rooms, but estimates usually suggest more than 100, and some speak of several hundred when tiny chambers and service spaces are counted. In any case, you're in a world where doors greatly outnumber people you can see at once. Every group has its own cluster of rooms, every rank has its assigned corner. The walls shimmer with Iznik and Kudaya tiles, deep blues, sharp whites, curling greens, floral patterns, inscriptions from the Quran. Many of the tiles visible today are 17th century, but the aesthetic vocabulary is very much of the classical Ottoman age. Light falls through high, grilled windows. Floors are covered with carpets and rush mats. Built-in wooden cupboards hide bedding rolled carefully away. These rooms were meant to be multi-purpose, transforming from sitting rooms to sleeping quarters as needed. Here and there, a brazier glows under a metal hood. You can almost feel the uneven warmth in winter. Toasty near the fire, chilly by the door. Voices echo differently in each space, bright and crisp in a tiled hall, muffled in a low-domed room full of cushions. If this sounds like a place you could easily get lost in, that's accurate. More than one modern researcher has admitted that even with plans in hand, it's hard to hold the entire layout in your head at once. For a sleepy wanderer like you, though, that's rather perfect. Getting a little lost is part of the charm. As you walk deeper, the abstract word harem breaks down into very specific titles and ranks. At the top sits the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother, if the Sultan's mother is still alive. In the 16th century, she occupies newly constructed apartments near the heart of the harem, and her influence can extend far beyond these rooms. Her quarters are large, with reception spaces, a private bedroom, and a small prayer room behind carved lattice. Decorative details, finer marble, more elaborate tiles, delicate mother-of-pearl inlays signal her status without needing a label. Below her are the Sultan's consorts. The most favoured bears the title Haseki Sultan, a role formerly recognised in the time of Hürrem and later women. Other official consorts are known as Kadın Efendiler. Beneath them are the Iqbals and Gözdis, favourites and chosen companions whose rank may rise if they bear a child. At the base of the pyramid are the Kariyes, the ordinary concubines and servants who form the bulk of the harem population. Each step up this ladder brings better rooms, higher stipends, more servants, and a stronger voice in the quiet politics of the palace. Each step down means more work, more supervision, fewer choices, but even at the lowest level, the hierarchy is not entirely rigid. A carrier who proves talented, trustworthy, or simply lucky might rise over time, becoming a senior servant, a respected kalfa, even the companion of a prince or sultan. From the outside, it is easy to reduce this to a single vertical chain, like a staircase. From inside, it feels more like a web of relationships. Patrons and protégés, tutors and pupils, older women mentoring younger ones, informal alliances and rivalries that matter as much as formal titles. Imagine the quiet flow of favours, advice and gossip through these rooms, like a second invisible plumbing system. To understand daily life here, you might imagine a boarding school with strong workplace vibes and very little privacy. One modern scholar has called the harem primarily a domestic institution of education rather than a permanent party, and the description fits what we know. At dawn, the first sound is water. Servants fill basins. Young women wash and prepare for prayers. In the baths, some shared, some reserved for the highest-ranking women, steam curls past pale marble basins, and water cups clink softly against stone. The warmth is a blessing in winter. In summer, the baths offer leisurely gossip and a chance to stretch out away from crowded dormitories. After prayers and a simple breakfast, lessons begin. For many carriers, the harem is the place where they learn to read and write Ottoman Turkish, perhaps to recite Arabic prayers correctly, to keep accounts, to understand court etiquette. Music and singing are important. Instruments like the udi and ney appear in descriptions of entertainment. Embroidery and textile work are constant companions. Fine stitching on garments, elaborate gold work on ceremonial cloths, endless mending and hemming. Some women specialise in one art and become prized for it, like the girl who always gets asked to fix the most complicated braid of gold thread. Classes are not like modern school periods with a bell, they are woven into the routines of the day. A senior kalfa might tutor a few younger girls at a time, correcting handwriting while also keeping an eye on the cooking schedule. A religious teacher from outside might be escorted in by eunuchs for a lesson, then swiftly escorted out again. For future consorts and mothers of princes, this education is preparation for managing not just rooms, but households and charitable foundations across the empire. Meals are eaten in shifts depending on rank. Food comes from the palace kitchens in great cauldrons, then is portioned out by stewards. Dishes tend to be simple but plentiful: stews, rice, bread, fruits, sherbets. On feast days the menu is richer. On fast days schedules adjust. If you listen closely in your mind, you can hear the clatter of metal trays on stone, the occasional argument about who got the slightly larger piece of lamb, and the resigned sigh of the woman who has somehow ended up on clean-up duty again. Afternoons might bring more lessons, sewing work or time with the children. Princes and princesses grow up in this world too. Young princes, before being sent to govern provinces, are educated partly within harem walls, especially in their early years, and their mother's status is a major concern for everyone. Play and politics mix. A game between children also reminds everyone whose child is favoured, whose misbehaviour is punished, whose achievements get praised loudly in the corridors. Evenings are for quieter pastimes. In larger rooms, women gather around a mangled brazier, the coals glowing as someone tells a story, perhaps about faraway lands or about a past sultan, or simply about something amusing that happened in the laundry. Coffee and sweet sherbets appear, carefully portioned. A singer might perform, a musician might improvise. Occasionally, there are more formal entertainments, especially when the Sultan visits or for major religious holidays. Dances, recitations, even shadow puppet plays adapted for an all-female audience. Romantic intrigue does exist, of course. This is a house full of human beings, not abstract roles. But for most of the women here, the shape of the day is defined less by seduction and more by schedules, chores, and the slow climb of training. Think less eternal banquet, and more overcrowded campus with exams you can't afford to fail. Life here is governed by rules, large and small. Some are written into regulations, others live only in habit and collective memory. Visits, for example, are tightly controlled. A woman cannot simply wander out to see the city. Almost no men enter except the Sultan, his young sons, doctors when necessary, and the eunuchs, who occupy a liminal in-between role. Movement within the harem itself is regulated by rank and schedule. A junior carrier does not stroll into the Valide Sultan's apartment unannounced. She moves when summoned, escorted if needed, and is keenly aware of who may be offended if she appears in the wrong place at the wrong time. The eunuchs at each gate are the visible part of this system. The rest is enforced by the women's own hierarchy. Kalfa and Usta, senior servants, keep things running and can make life pleasant or very uncomfortable for anyone who breaks the unwritten code. Seclusion is real, but it is not absolute silence. Letters go in and out. News from the outside world arrives with eunuchs, with merchants bringing fabrics or perfumes to inner reception spaces, with relatives visiting on special occasions. Some women eventually leave, married off to high officials as part of carefully arranged alliances, that extend the harem's influence into the provinces. For most, though, the art of being unseen becomes second nature. You might imagine a girl who arrived as a teenager from a distant village. After a decade inside these walls, she could probably walk the Golden Road corridor at night, in almost complete darkness, by feel alone, counting steps, tracing fingers along familiar doorframes, sensing where the floor dips slightly. The outer city across the water would be more foreign to her than this tiled maze. At the core of the harem runs a narrow passage with a bright name, the Golden Road, Altin Yol. This corridor connects the courtyard of the eunuchs to the Sultan's private chambers, with doorways opening to the apartments of the Valid Sultan, the chief consort and the princes. Its walls are plain and light-coloured, the ceiling low enough to feel intimate. Some say the name comes from coins the Sultan tossed here on feast days for the women to collect, though historians point out that stories have a way of becoming more picturesque over time. For the Sultan, this passage is a secure route between worlds. For the women, it is the axis along which so much of their fate turns. A rare, brief encounter in one of the rooms off this corridor might elevate a woman's status for life. A cold glance or a forgotten promise might quietly end her hopes. In popular imagination, this has become a place of dramatic romance and jealousy. In reality, it was probably more often a place of careful choreography, where everyone knew exactly how far to bow, how long to hold a gaze, how to speak without overstepping. Nearby lies the Imperial Hall, a great dome chamber used for family ceremonies, festivals, and receptions. Here, under rich decoration, the Sultan might sit on a gilded throne, while his consorts and children gathered on the gallery above, the Valide Sultan presiding. Weddings, holiday greetings, and intimate audiences all passed through this room. If you stand there now amid the empty ropes and explanatory signs, it is hard not to imagine the rustle of silk, the flash of jewellery, the complicated mixture of pride and anxiety whenever the entire dynastic household gathered in one echoing space. By the end of your imagined walk, you have passed from guards' courtyards to concubines' dormitories, from tiled halls to narrow servants' stairs, from the Valide Sultan's lofty rooms to tiny cells where novices once slept shoulder to shoulder. You have seen the harem not as a single picture, but as a layered settlement of people, routines, and rules. In the 16th century, this world is at its most settled form inside Topkapı. The Imperial Harem has become a structured institution with formal titles, clear hierarchies, and a strong educational mission. It is still a domestic space. Behind every rule is someone eating, laughing, crying, sewing, muttering about chores. But it is also increasingly a political force. The women raised and ranked here will influence marriages, appointments, and even succession. In the next part of the story, some of them will step, at least metaphorically, beyond the lattice and into the centre of imperial politics, in the era later called the Sultanate of Women. For now, though, you find yourself gently retracing your steps, back along the Golden Road, past the gates watched over by eunuchs, through the courtyard of the eunuchs, where the lamps are burning low, out into the cooler air of the second courtyard of Topkapı, where the trees are still, and the city beyond the walls glows faintly under the night sky. You came in looking for a place of legend. You leave with the echo of real footsteps on stone, and the sense that behind those tiled walls, the Empire's most private life moved to a complicated, disciplined rhythm that you can almost still hear if you listen carefully enough. Imagine Topkapı Palace again at night. The outer courtyards are dark, the kitchen's quiet, the marble still cooling from the day, but deep inside the harem, behind latticed windows and carved wooden screens, the air feels a little more awake. This is the 16th and 17th century, the time later called the Sultanate of Women, when the most powerful people in the empire were often the ones almost no one ever saw. You're still the invisible guest, tucked in a corner, listening. Suleiman sits on the throne, the empire at its height, and beside him, though never officially on the dais, is a woman who changes the rules, Harem Sultan. She comes to the palace as a slave of likely Eastern European origin, is converted to Islam, trained, educated, and rises to become Suleiman's favourite. That much has happened before. What's new is what happens next. He frees her, marries her, and keeps her beside him in Istanbul rather than sending her away with a prince to govern some distant province. Suddenly, the Sultan's closest companion is not a passing favourite, but a permanent partner at the centre of the palace. Letters between them survive. Formal, affectionate, serious. Harem asks for charitable foundations, for help for certain people, for decisions about their children. Suleiman answers with real respect. In the lamplight of her apartments, you can imagine the scene. A scribe reading the Sultan's words aloud, Harem listening, then dictating her reply while a servant pours coffee. It looks like a family moment. It is also a small cabinet meeting. She sponsors mosques, baths, and soup kitchens. She places allies. She raises sons who will shape the future. In a world where she cannot sit in the Imperial Council, she turns domestic space into a control room. Harem's influence opens a door for others. After her, the title that really matters is Valide Sultan, the Mother Sultan, mother of the reigning ruler. Her apartments sit near the heart of the harem, richly tiled, with their own reception rooms. Eunuch servants and petitioners move in and out like a quiet tide. The Valide controls stipends within the harem, influences marriages, and can back or undermine powerful officials. A Grand Vizier who ignores her does so at his own risk. Think of the empire as a ship again. The Sultan is the owner. The Vizier the captain shouting orders on deck. The Valide is below, in the chart room, quietly deciding where the important passengers sleep and who actually gets paid. Around Harem and after her, more women step into this role. Suleiman's daughter, Mihrima, uses her position to sponsor mosques and charitable complexes. Her buildings still shape parts of Istanbul's skyline. Nurbanu Sultan, mother of Murad III, corresponds with Venice. Diplomats learn that a carefully chosen gift to her can make treaty talks smoother. Safia Sultan of Albanian origin exchanges letters with Queen Elizabeth I via English merchants, proof that the harem's shadows stretch all the way to London drawing rooms. You can picture a quiet afternoon in one of their apartments, bolts of cloth being examined, a letter from a foreign court read aloud, a map unfolded on a low table. The harem is supposed to be sealed off. Somehow news of half the world still finds its way here. Then comes Kösem. She arrives as a slave, becomes the favoured consort of Ahmed I, and eventually the mother of multiple sultans. Over several reigns, she serves as Valide Sultan, and, at times, as regent when a child sits on the throne. If the phrase Sultanate of Women had a single emblem, it might be her. Imagine her in a large, high-ceilinged room, the walls a cool shimmer of blue and white tiles. A eunuch reports unrest among the janissaries. Another brings word of trouble in a distant province. A secretary waits with a draft decree. Somewhere in the next room, a young sultan plays a game with friends, still half a boy. Kösem's power is not theatrical, it's administrative. She approves stipends for mosques and soup kitchens, pushes for certain men to become governors, tries to keep peace between factions in the army and the court. She is constantly negotiating, between old janissary privileges and new financial realities, between rival branches of the dynasty, between her duties to the empire and her instinct to protect her own sons. Later stories wrap her in drama and dark intrigue. In reality, her daily life probably involved more meetings and difficult decisions than dramatic speeches. It's less evil masterman stroking a cat, and more overworked manager with permanent political jet lag. Her end comes in palace struggle, no need to replay the details here. But her career shows how far a woman could move the levers of the state without ever appearing on a public balcony. After Kösem, another figure steps forward. Turhan Hatiti, she arrives young, probably from Ukraine, becomes a concubine of Ibrahim and the mother of Mehmed IV. When her son becomes sultan as a child, there is a struggle between Turhan and Kösem over who will truly hold power as regent. Turhan eventually gains the upper hand and becomes Valide Sultan. Like her predecessors, she uses her position to shape the city. The great Yenikami complex near the Golden Horn is completed under her patronage. Mosque, market, charitable buildings, all carrying her name into public space. Inside the harem, she oversees education, marriages, appointments. Outside, strong Grand Viziers begin to take more visible control of reform and war. By the later 17th century, the pattern is starting to shift. Sultans grow more involved again. A line of powerful viziers emerges. The long era when a royal woman might effectively steer the empire for years from behind the lattice slowly draws to a close. But holy is the key word. Influence doesn't just switch off like a lamp. It fades, changes shape, moves into different channels. From the outside, European observers are fascinated and baffled. They are barred from the harem, so they fill the silence with imagination. Some describe the women as dangerous enchantresses who topple states with a glance. Others paint them as tragic captives with no agency at all. Plays and travelogues embroider rumours into full-blown legends. Reality, as usual, is less tidy, less flattering and more interesting. Most of the political work these women do is not glamorous. It's letters, negotiations, careful timing, giving or withholding money, saying yes to one official and no to another. It's also risk. Every decision can make enemies. Hurrem, Nobanu, Safiye, Kusem, Turhan all walk a narrow path where one misstep could mean exile, isolation, or worse. Still, if you listen carefully in these imaginary rooms, what you hear is not just fear. You also hear purpose. A Valida Sultan planning a soup kitchen for the poor, a princess choosing an architect for a mosque, a consort urging better terms for a provincial town. In their own ways, they are trying to leave the empire a little different from how they found it. Take one last, slow walk down the Golden Road, that narrow passage at the heart of the harem. Once, on feast days, coins may have clinked onto its floor. Once, the most powerful women in the empire stepped through here toward the imperial hall, veils arranged, thoughts very carefully in order. Now, in your night walk, it's quiet. The tiles are cool, the light low, but if you pause, you can almost feel a presence, not of one woman, but of many, layered over each other, like faint voices in the same room. In the next part of the story, the empire itself begins to change. New palaces appear along the Bosphorus. European fashions creep into these rooms, and eventually, the harem doors open not for ambassadors or brides, but for tourists and museum guides. For tonight, you can let the sound of those soft footsteps fade, knowing that behind those latticed windows, power once moved so quietly that it was almost invisible, except to anyone close enough to hear the whisper. Imagine just for a moment that you've stepped off the tram in Istanbul, not at the gates of Topkapı, but down by the water, somewhere along the Bosphorus. It's night again. The strait is a dark ribbon, a few lanterns bobbing on passing boats, the sound of water slapping gently at stone. Above you, instead of one old palace on a hill, there are lights scattered along the shoreline. Dolmabahce, Turan, Yildiz. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the Ottoman court begins to drift this way, toward the water, toward gardens and pavilions and the soft promise of a view. The harem comes with it. You're still following the same people, really. The Sultan's mother, his consorts, his daughters, his sisters, the same ranks of eunuchs and servants and concubines. But the rooms around them are changing. The empire is under pressure from Europe, from Russia, from within. Reform is in the air. And even behind the most tightly shuttered windows, fashions, languages, and habits start to shift. The old stone corridors of Topkapı are not abandoned all at once. In the 18th century, sultans still use the palace, but they also spend long stretches in waterfront residences, like the wooden palaces of Beşiktaş, or the pleasure pavilions of the so-called tulip era. You can imagine harem women stepping into gilded barges, veils drawn, cushions piled high as they are ferried along the water from one residence to another. On shore, gardeners coax tulips and roses into elaborate beds. Inside, women watch the fireworks of court festivals reflected on the surface of the Bosphorus instead of in the tile of old courtyards. The rhythm of life is more leisurely in some ways, more precarious in others. The court experiments with European-style entertainments, new kinds of music, new fabrics. Porcelain from faraway factories appears on low tables, French perfumes mix with rose water, and somewhere in a quiet room a palace musician tries to work out whether a Western waltz rhythm can live peacefully next to an Ottoman makam. It is an empire in conversation with other worlds, even if the conversation is sometimes a little one-sided. By the mid-19th century, the conversation turns into architecture. On the European shore of the Bosphorus, Dolmabahce Palace rises, a long facade of stone and stucco and glass that looks, at first glance, more like something from Paris or Vienna than old Istanbul. Its halls are huge, its chandeliers dramatic, its staircases the sort of staircases people descend slowly so their outfits have time to be properly admired. When the court moves here under Sultan Abdülmecid, the harem moves with it. Step into those inner quarters in your imagination. The basic rules are the same: seclusion, hierarchy, rank, the careful watch of eunuchs at each door. But the objects have changed. There are now upholstered sofas with springs, heavy velvet curtains, European-style beds instead of only mattresses rolled out on the floor. Portraits hang in frames, clocks tick on mantelpieces. A princess might sit at a small desk writing in a mixture of Ottoman, Turkish and French, the nib of her pen scratching softly over paper. In the next room, someone practices the piano, the notes a little hesitant, threading gently through the corridors. Education in the harem expands. Elite women learn not only calligraphy and poetry, but foreign languages and elements of Western music. European governesses sometimes appear as tutors. So do Ottoman reformers who believe that for the empire to survive, its ruling family's daughters should be literate in the new ways as well as the old. For many harem women, the world is still mostly rooms and gardens, but the map in their heads now includes Paris and London, even if only as names in a newspaper. The old image of the harem as timeless and unchanging is quietly falling apart behind these walls. It is still a world of restriction. It is also a world slowly filling up with clocks, magazines and visiting cards. Photography adds a new layer. In the late 19th century, sultans and their families sit for portraits. Some of those portraits include harem women, posed carefully in European-style gowns, their faces sometimes veiled, sometimes visible, their bodies arranged among chairs and carpets in ways that look familiar if you've ever seen a stiff studio photograph from that age. Outside viewers are still not allowed into the harem freely, but now images can leave even when the women stay, carried away on cards and albums and diplomatic gifts. Meanwhile, the political climate grows tense. The empire faces territorial losses, debt and revolts. Sultan Abdülhamid II, anxious and cautious, chooses to live mainly in yet another palace, Yıldız, set on a wooded hill above the Bosphorus. The harem follows him again, like the shadow of the dynasty. Life there is said to be both strict and strangely modern. Close surveillance, yes, but also more structured education, more contact with European styles, more books. Picture a winter evening in Yıldız harem. Outside, the trees are dark against the sky. Inside, stoves burn steadily in tiled stoves, the metal ticking as it expands and cools. A group of young women gather in a salon, listening, as a teacher reads from a book about geography or history. A princess traces the outlines of distant continents with her eyes while knowing she may never see them. Another woman quietly copies a passage she likes into her own notebook. The empire's borders are shrinking, but the mental world of its women is, in some ways, expanding. And yet, for all the new objects and ideas, the core of the institution remains the same. The harem is still a place where marriage is arranged rather than chosen, where women's movement is limited, where the line between privilege and captivity is very thin. For every princess who later writes memoirs about her childhood in these palaces, there are many more women whose names barely make it into the record, whose memories dissolve into the anonymous category of carrier and kalfa, their lives shaped by the daily routines of work, duty and waiting. Outside the palace, the very idea of the harem is starting to crack. Urban elites in Istanbul and other cities begin to adopt more open domestic arrangements. Reformers argue for girls' schools, for changes in marriage law, for a different relationship between men and women. The imperial harem, once a model for provincial households, starts to look, even to some Ottomans, like an expensive relic. Then comes the early 20th century. Revolution in 1908, war in the Balkans, then the First World War. The empire staggers under defeat and occupation. In the middle of all this, in 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate is abolished. The last sultan, Mehmed VI, leaves Istanbul by ship. The dynasty is exiled. The harem, as an imperial institution, ends. You can approach that moment gently in your mind. One day, these palaces are still full of women and children whose lives have always been organised around the person of the sultan. The next, in historical terms, the focus disappears. Many of the women go into exile with the dynasty, scattering to cities across Europe and the Middle East. Others remain in the new Republic of Turkey, moving into private life, marrying, teaching, living quietly on reduced pensions, occasionally giving interviews or writing memoirs about a world that suddenly belongs to the past. The rooms they leave behind do not vanish. Slowly they become something else. Topkapı Palace, long overshadowed by Dolmabahce and Yildiz, is turned into a museum. The Harem section, once so fiercely guarded, is gradually open to visitors. Guides learn to shepherd groups through the courtyard of the eunuchs, the valid sultan's apartments, the cramped dormitories, the bright imperial hall, all the places you have been walking through in imagination. Dolmabahce and other palaces along the Bosphorus also become sites of memory, their harems no longer functioning households but preserved shells. For modern visitors, the old myths cling stubbornly. Some people arrive expecting scandal and find instead the surprisingly domestic space. Laundry rooms, baths, schoolrooms, small chambers where 3 or 4 women must once have slept side by side. Others assume the women had no minds or voices of their own, and are surprised to learn about Hürrem, Kusum, Turhan, and the 19th century princesses who played the piano, spoke French or wrote. As you imagine yourself back at Topkapı one last time, it is once again night. The tour groups are gone. Only security lights glimmer on the walls. The tiled corridors of the harem are empty, the cushions gone, the braziers cold. In a way, the space has returned to being a kind of dream, a place you can walk through with your eyes, trying to reconstruct the lives that once filled it. You began this journey in a simple back room in Bursa, where a baby cried behind a wooden partition and a woman stirred a pot on the fire. You followed that pattern as it swelled into the complicated world of Topkapı's harem, then into the glittering salons of Dolmabahce and Yildiz. You watched, in imagination, as women behind latticed windows shaped marriages, policies and buildings, as their influence rose and then softened into memory. Now the doors are open, at least in a museum sense. Anyone can buy a ticket and step into the spaces that were once guarded by eunuchs and reserved for a very small circle. Yet there is still a threshold of a sort. You cannot bring back the voices. You can only let the stones and tiles suggest them, so you walk slowly down one last corridor. Your imaginary footsteps echo where slippers once whispered over carpet. At the end of the passage, there is a door leading back into the night air of present-day Istanbul. When you step through, the Bosphorus is still there, the city is still humming, and the long, layered story of the Ottoman harem folds itself quietly away, like bedding rolled up and stored in a wooden cupboard until someone someday wants to take it out again in their mind and dream their way through it. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time.